I've been holding on to this one for a minute, and the title of this paper is "Men Wanted the Feminized Campus versus Decent Masculinity" by James G. Martin. Um, Skipping down, the consensus opinion of the academic establishment is predictable. The concept of traditional Western masculinity must go. Contemporary university campuses are linking the supposedly hypermasculine behavior of Weinstein and his ilk to the struggles of many young men to succeed in higher education. Some are implementing programs to counter what they call toxic masculinity. On a small but growing number of campuses, student affairs reformers are drawing on 40 years of research showing that distorted cultural notions of masculinity skew the psychosocial development of many male students, leading them to be disruptive, threatening, self harming, and sometimes dangerous. Anytime they put psychosocial development of many male students, you got to remember these are adults. These are not 7-year-olds. Anytime they put that in there, they're talking about brainwashing people. One administrator at the University of Richmond comments on the young men in his program. It's really hard for them to be vulnerable. Vulnerable. It runs counter to the narrative of be a man, be tough. He further criticizes such notions as man up, which can whiplash into aggression and other unruliness. Unruliness means uncontrollable or not meeting the model, which is a white female. The left perceives these programs as coddling a male demographic that already experiences too much privilege. Many on the right see them as an attack on masculinity. The conservative critique of the treatment of men goes back to at least to Christina Hoff Sommers' book, 2000 book, The War on Boys. Yeah, there's many others. Others see this as simply a byproduct of the rise of women, as women have achieved parity in political, economic, and social standing with men. It is inevitable that some men, especially those of a hyper-masculine disposition, would feel threatened. Without social approval for traditionally masculine attributes, with no apparent alternative, such men would naturally lash out as they struggle to adapt to the new norm. But defiant aggressiveness is not the only response to this new sexual reality. Millions of young men are already checking out of modern society in one way or another. Many are playing video games rather than going to college or seeking full time work. Some may not be worried about this phenomenon, but combined with other indicators, there is ample evidence that young men are struggling. Now, this is MGTOW evidence. With so many of their peers removing themselves from the mating scene and with males a shrinking minority on the campuses that were once their domain, the hypermasculine college student can avail himself of as many women as he can juggle. While the diagnosis of this sexual anarchy might be realistic, the remedy is not. Universities are turning toward counseling programs for men aimed at suppressing alpha male behavior. This is counseling program. The problem is that universities are making the same mistakes that many make in the manosphere, that of misunderstanding the alpha male. The distinction between alpha and beta males is a flawed dichotomy derived from study on male wolves in captivity. In captivity, researchers noted that male wolves fall into two categories, alpha and beta. Alpha males become aggressive and dominant, and beta males become submissive and fearful. This categorization is frequently applied or misapplied to human males. The aggressive, swaggering, and occasionally threatening behavior of alphas is roundly condemned in academia, even though many young women find it desirable and some young men find it admirable. However, the study and categorization are based on male wolves in captivity. It tells us nothing about how healthy male wolves behave in their natural environment. Such a study might tell us something about how healthy male humans behave or ought to behave in their natural environment. And see, up and down until quite late in the 20th century, researchers assumed a wolf pack was a group of unrelated wolves who fought each other for dominance within the pack. When wolves were actually studied in the wild, researchers realized that a wolf pack was a family. In other words, for survival, the pack has to cooperate. That's how they bring down game that are larger than themselves. They cooperate, just like lions do. They cooperate. Male wolves in this environment focus on protecting pack members and cultivating relationships with their children and partner. Wolves mate for life, as well as asserting their dominance against outside aggressors. Wolves actually pair bond. They don't have two or three people or two or three mates. They have one. They pair bond. So an alpha male and an alpha female, so to speak, would pair bond, and then it would be assortative mating on downward. Which brings us back to toxic masculinity. Behavior that is labeled as such by today's feminists falls into two categories. The first is a sort of posturing and abusive behavior that characterizes Weinstein and his ilk. The second is assertive male behavior that gets labeled toxic, but is nothing of the kind. It is a sort of assertiveness that a healthy male engages when offering protection or taking leadership when it matters. It is an important aspect of what I would call decent masculinity. See, this is the problem. This is the problem. They're conflating the two. They're trying to use Weinstein and some of the more abusive nature of some men and graft what we call normal male behavior or normal masculine behavior as toxic because they want you to be vulnerable. Being vulnerable is not male behavior. But they're trying to socialize these young men or continue the socializing of these young men to be vulnerable and to be what I call supportive. The remedy is not to demand that he be less assertive, but that he gain self-restraint. We must take aim at the toxic and not the masculine, lest as a society we throw the Hectors out with the Parises. Here's something interesting. Universities seem to grasp this at some level, although they inevitably mischaracterize it. One article suggests encouraging young men to emulate the following example, among others, of standing up to wrongful behavior. Their intervening bystander, the frat brother or teammate, or just a random guy at a party who confronts another guy who is about to do something that is at best sketchy and at worst a felony assault. He's not about rescuing a damsel in distress. He's just doing the right thing. Well, such a man in that situation would be, in fact, rescuing a damsel in distress, according to this guy, and that's a good thing. That doesn't mean a decent masculinity isn't limited to rescuing damsels in distress, but rescuing said damsels in the category of doing the right thing, and something that is instinctual in a healthy male. Aggressive defending the weak from predators is not the same as conducting one's business affairs ethically. Also, an example of doing the right thing. Many of the problems with the Weinstein case is precisely that men and women around these predators didn't rescue the damsels in distress. These betas submitted to the alpha male in the unnatural environment of Hollywood. For Hollywood is certainly as distorted an environment for humans as is captivity for wolves, twisted by extremes of wealth, power, ambition, and perversity, and radical politics. One could argue that prior to the Weinstein debacle, there was more stigma attached to the behavior of the old-fashioned man who purportedly degrades women by protecting them than the sleazeball who subjects women to actual degradation. Hector would have a worse reputation in Paris among these louts. From the skewed perspective, the men who allowed Weinstein and his ilk to get away with what they did for so long are feminist heroes. They let the young women fend for themselves. Social structures on college campuses can be as unnatural as those of Tinseltown. The campus has largely been handed over to radical feminists, some of whom consider gender to be a social construct rather than rooted in biology. I've always said that gender as a construct, or gender as we see it, is rooted in biology. And when you get away from that, you're going to get this mass confusion, as the alphabet crew actually informs us. Nobody knows what they are. Real masculinity has been related to the narrow confines of the playing field and gymnasium. Female students vastly outnumber males, and random sexual hookups are common, while women, from willing partners to anti-male gender warriors, can pose danger for even well-meaning men. Title IX imposes false equalities, and every male preserved from fraternities to science labs is under pressure to yield to feminist strictures. In other words, they are buck breaking. They are buck breaking the male, psychologically buck breaking. So it makes sense. That unnatural alpha and beta male behavior would emerge amidst such confusion. In other words, that what we call these alpha and beta male behavior is unnatural. The competition between so-called alphas and so-called betas is unnatural. Cooperation is natural. Cooperation amongst the male pack is natural. The real solution may be one that I suspect that many college administrators will not like: developing a decent masculinity, one that is assertive and strong and looks to Hector as its guide. The guy doing the right thing is a guy who asserts himself in a situation where the momentum and social advantage is going the other way. My question: what can universities do to encourage the traits of a positive or decent masculinity? Some insight into the question is provided by looking at the prevalent male need for role models. Much of the charge against traditional male behavior is led by feminized males in positions of authority. Let that sink in. Much of the charge against traditional male behavior is led by feminized males in positions of authority. Do we not see that online? Do we not see that in the newspapers? Do we not see that in magazines, online magazines? It's not really the females. Heck, it's the males. We see this right now with the purple pill takeover of the manosphere. Skipping down, his book, Man Up, Survive a Modern Masculinity, argues that we don't need to be men our grandfathers were. I disagree. We need to be exactly the men our grandfathers were, or at least my grandfathers were. Okay, skipping down. The last point implicates the disciplinary role model and calls to mind another study of the animal world that reveals how destructive the absence of strong male figures can be. In South Africa, young male elephants from herds that had lost their older male elephants to poaching went on rampages and killed a number of white rhinos. Officials solved the problem by bringing a number of older bull elephants. These older males made the unruly youngsters shape up, and the rampages stopped immediately. People are not elephants, but the same dynamic has been observed in hunter-gatherer tribes in modern societies with healthier social structures than ours. What is that saying? It said the structure that we have now is not healthy. It's not the men or the masculinity that's toxic. It's the societal environment that we're in that's toxic. And the men are just trying to respond to it. So what are universities doing to cultivate strong male role models? Figures who can keep misbehaving younger males in line and offering a living, breathing example of strong masculine presence. As far as I can tell, nothing. What I want to point out here is that there is a relationship between the toxic alpha and betas. The betas not only let the toxic alphas run the show, they think their passiveness is a sign of virtue until it obviously is not, and then confusion ensues. What do we see online? What I have described here is a challenge to the egalitarian ethic. Men are different from women. They have their own needs, their own challenges. To have healthy men on campus, we need to acknowledge that. Skipping down. For one thing, today's toxic masculinity is occurring in tandem with a retreat. Get this, with a retreat from masculinity. They appear to be opposite reactions to the same environment. What did I just say? It's not the men that are toxic, it's the environment that's toxic. Weinstein is not a true alpha. Like Paris, he is a beta in wolf's clothing. He's basically these kind of guys are that are predators are not alphas. They're betas that are taking advantage of the situation. By releasing healthy, decent masculinity from its radical feminist chains and populating the campus with tough but wise bull elephants, the problem of toxic masculinity may find its historic and effective antidote. I doubt that's going to happen because women, feminists, like this environment because it puts them in control. They don't want healthy masculinity. Even if you induce healthy masculinity, a lot of this stuff would disappear. If they separated the boys from the girls and bring back men's colleges, then most of this stuff would disappear. But they don't want to do that. Why? Because they want to create beta males. They want to create the supportive males. They want to do what? Break the males from being masculine. That's how come they want to introduce all these counseling sessions, all these programs to take away so-called male privilege. That's what all this is about. Like I said, Weinstein is not a true alpha like Paris. He's a beta in wolf's clothing. And I love what he says. What so-called toxic masculinity is occurring in tandem with a retreat from masculinity. In other words, what they call toxic masculinity or the toxic alphas, as they call it, are what women like. The thing is, they don't want them to disappear. They want to control them. They want to call the shots. They want the swaggering dude that is sometimes threatening, but they want that dude to be threatening under their control. And the normal masculinity, the normal boy behavior or male behavior, they want to eliminate it. So the thing is, they do this from kindergarten to 12th grade. And the guys that do escape and still have their masculinity intact, they want them to go in counseling sessions on these campuses to go ahead and finish the program. This is psychological buck breaking. And this is something that they're actually admitting to. This is not something that's in your mind. This is not something that's unintentional. This is very intentional. Title IX is explicit. They're using Title IX to change what? What does it say? On a small but growing number of campuses, student affairs reformers are drawing on 40 years of research showing that distorted cultural notions of masculinity skew the psychosocial development of many male students. The academy is trying to shape masculinity. They're trying to psychologically break these dudes and break them and demasculinize them psychologically. That's what they're trying to do. And if you let it get off the campus, just like Yes Means Yes started on the campus with the Dear Colleague letter in 2011 under the Obama administration. 5 years later, Me Too was spreading around the corporate world and in Hollywood. If it starts in the campus, it's going to spread its way out. It's going to spread its way out into the normal world. This is what they're planning. This is how come they're writing these themes about toxic masculinity. This is them trying to program men. This is psychological buck breaking. Buck breaking is doing what? Try and take the natural assertiveness out of a male. They did that with slaves back in the day, with punishment, whips, and other things to break the buck, to psychologically take the assertiveness and aggressiveness out of a male. Beware, folks. This is not some conspiracy. This is an active program. And if you're not careful, you're going to be on that counseling sessions ordered by a judge to go sit down, and they're going to break you too. They're going to neuter you too, just like they're trying to do to these boys on campus. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.